feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at MAYAAkai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to episode 42, 2 weeks late, of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Sorry for the kind of hiatus between episodes, but I had some projects I were working on that I had to give my full attention to. And so though I kept telling myself I was going to do this show, it just didn't happen. But you know what? Better late than never. And my endeavors that I was focusing on, everything came to fruition. So hopefully you've been doing the work and going through some of the past episodes of M.A.Y.A. Since we're 42 episodes in, remember there's a rule we have with M.A.Y.A that you work at your own pace. So whether you're back on episode 20 or 25, it doesn't matter. I enjoy anytime you tune in automatically to be here for every episode when it airs Thursday at 2 p.m. But it's all about working at your pace. And episode 42, the many facets of you. We're going to dig a little bit deeper and talk about the self, something we talked about in some earlier episodes. But of course, before we do that, we have to do our housekeeping things. You know, as I like to say that I feel that M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, is a salient and thought-provoking podcast. Well, I take topics and focus around mental wellness, those things that may be a challenge for you, you're struggling with. We use the show to kind of work through those different dynamics. And it usually falls into those domains of obviously maybe some emotional challenge, mental challenge, physical challenges, spiritual challenges, financial challenges. And I've now added into that layer social challenges, because I think that and professional challenges deserve to be in the conversation of things that impact your mental wellness. So we're expanding our domains out, and mental wellness is that umbrella that covers all those domains, which means we can really dive into some interesting topics and conversations as the podcast progresses and we get more episodes under our belt. But before we do that, if you are a first-time listener, welcome aboard, or viewer, welcome aboard. I always say buckle up for safety. Not that this isn't a safe space, but maybe I'll say something in the midst of the conversation that may jar or elicit emotion from you, something you never consider. Well, that's a good thing. It means maybe you found something that you need to work on. If you are a returning listener or viewer, then it's business as usual for you. You know how things work. Grab a pencil and paper so you may want to jot down some things, some thoughts that pop into your mind as we progress through the podcast. Since we are 42 episodes in, by now, you should know that you can listen to episodes of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition at MAYAAkai.com. Just go there. As well as with every episode, there is a podcast companion, which means some additional information that I share with the podcast that I think can expand the conversation a bit more beyond what we talked about within the podcast. Hopefully by now you have subscribed to MAYAAkai. If not, do that now. Like and subscribe as well as share. You just go to YouTube, search MAYAAkai, and you're going to get a whole bunch of Japanese anime initially, and you scroll down and boom, there I am. You will find me, of course, but I'm not going to be biased. If you happen to have a podcast platform of choice, I won't hold that against you. You can always find episodes of M.A.Y.A in Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio. I'm on Amazon Audibles now, Spotify. There's so many. Pretty much if there's a podcast platform, more likely than not, I am there. All you have to do is look for M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. And lastly, hopefully you have gotten social with me by now, which means you are following me on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai and Facebook, Maya Akai Presents. So one of the key things that we always do before we jump into the episode is, what do we put out there? And I know it's been 2 weeks, so this is really truly a refresher. We open up our toolbox and we go ahead and we take our emotional intelligence and we put it on the table. If you are a first-time listener or viewer, emotional intelligence, or it may be referred to EI occasionally, is your ability to perceive, control, and evaluate emotion. Emotion, not just for you, but that of others. So you make better choices in how you choose to respond to situations or people versus reacting. That's a big part of this show. Is I want people to learn how to respond versus react. And I'm going to tell you something. That is a challenging thing, because even when you know better, it doesn't mean you always make the best choice. But when you work towards responding to things, even if you're agitated, frustrated, you just feel like you're at your rope's end with situations or people, being able to step back and respond makes it easier to navigate that situation, because then that means that you don't have to go back and apologize because you've said things that you didn't mean. So key things we try to put in our toolbox is learning how to respond versus reacting. I want to start this episode out with what I feel is a saying that puts episode 42 into perspective, the many facets of you. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. That is a quote by Aristotle, as you know, is a Greek philosopher. Let that sink in for a minute, because the many facets of you of this episode is really about understanding what is the psychology of self. It is the foundational thing that will help you be able to make better decisions that are for you, and as well as into context of others. So the wisdom beginning with knowing yourself is so important, because it's safe to say that, you hear sayings like, when you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for everything. And it's true, because you really have not cemented for yourself where you're grounded in your beliefs. Remember, morals and values, those core morals and values are very important. Way back in one of those episodes, we talked about understanding where you stand in regards to core values and morals, because it will be the driving force behind your decision making. More importantly, understanding you at the heart of that is your core values and morals. So I would encourage you to go back to whatever episode that is. I can't even remember, and check it out. So, great saying by Aristotle: knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, because you are the most important study that you could ever possibly have. Most people just don't believe that. All right, let's jump right into episode 42, the many facets of you. I really had a good time putting this particular episode together, because it's something that's simplistic, yet it's very complicated and layered. And I'll tell you, when you do the therapy work, FYI, for those who listen to the show consistently, one of my goals coming into 2021 was to pass my state licensure test to do private practice. I passed. So now I get to expand my professional goals beyond just working in crisis intervention, which I do now, and really begin to work with people on a more individual level. And the core of most issues that even when I encounter in doing crisis work is people clearly do not always have a good understanding of self. So when we talk about the many facets of you, it's really as simply as talking about a self-concept. And self-concept is a general term, and it's used to refer to how you think about, evaluate, or perceive yourselves or ourselves. So ultimately, that concept, as by now I'm sure you'll figure out, is really impacted by many things: experiences, interactions. There's so much that shapes your self-concept, and your self-concept grows and evolves over time. Though, at the core of who you are, just know this: you are consistently the same, and hopefully that consistency is good. Remember, part of our objective here with M.A.Y.A is to work on getting to that best version of you every single day. Not the lofty idea of the best version of you, but the daily best version of you, harnessing that happiness that you seek. And we talked about an episode about happiness. Happiness is not all sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns. There's some days where happiness might just be very standard and mediocre, but that's okay, because it means maybe there was no conflict, maybe there was no challenges, and the day went through without any issues, and you can sit down in the day and say, today was a good day. It was pretty simple. I'm good with that. So don't overthink the idea of happiness, because often people think that happiness has to equate to grandiosity, and it doesn't. So your self-concept is really infected by so many things, but more importantly, it's how you think about, evaluate, and perceive those situations for yourselves that help to shape and frame your self-concept. So I want you to be aware. And this is really key, because we're going to pull this apart by layers. And I think it's so important that you really begin to understand. To be aware of oneself is to have a concept of oneself. So what does that mean, to be aware of oneself? Okay, let's go ahead and jump into having our first real talk time of the show. Because when we talk about this, though it may seem general, there's some key things that you must understand. Self-awareness is more than just waking up and breathing. It's not just about going through your day as business as usual. That's being alive, not necessarily being aware, or the new term that people like to throw around when they are awakened is you're woke, which means you're now dialed in. Your eyes are open. You see something, or you're experiencing something in a way that you never have before, and it's creating some amount of consciousness that's important for you. So a lot of people, the new term is woke. Awake, woke, obviously they're in the same vein. But the key thing about self-awareness And mind you, these concepts can seem very interchangeable. Self-concept, self-awareness is more than just waking up and breathing and going through the motions. And I'll tell you something, if you find yourself doing that, that's when you have to step back, because that's when people start saying things like, I feel stuck. I just feel like life is just going through the motions so much. That's when you got to step back at your life and see the bigger picture. Like, what's really going on here? Why do I feel unsatisfied with my life? Because you have every right to be satisfied with your life on a daily basis, as well as on an ongoing, weekly, daily, month, week, year. You have a right to have access to that type of satisfaction. But it is something that you have to work to. And a lot of people struggle with that. So, being self-aware, I want you to keep this in mind. Being self-aware means you exist with intention. You connect, you're tapped into how you feel in the moment, how you exchange with others, and how that exchange impacts you emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. And this is why I decided to start adding under the mental wellness umbrella the domains of social and professional. Because mental wellness gets its tentacles into all of those areas. Let me say that again. Self-awareness means you exist with intention. You connect and tap into how you feel in the moment, how your exchanges with others impact you emotionally, mentally, physically, and even spiritually. So with that being said, who are you? That's an external talk versus who am I? That's internal talk. That's what understanding yourself and what self-concept is all about. It's having an answer to that internal talk you're having. Remember last episode 41 was about self-talk, which was huge. I tell you to go back because these are all interwoven together. Like I call them podcast threads. You must understand who am I in that internal talk. And when that is more succinct, who are you, the external talk that people may ask that question actually is clear. But when who am I is muddied and not clear, the who are you is equally the same thing. And I would ask everybody at this time, if someone was to ask you that question, who are you, how would you answer that? But the most important question right now is I want you to focus on in this particular episode is who am I? And if I ask you that, what does that mean? So if you ask me, Maya, what's your internal talk? Who am I? I would tell you I'm a person that has conviction. I'm loyal. I can be short-tempered at times. I can allow myself to be overworked, overwhelmed, but I always handle chaos relatively well. I'm kind, but I don't necessarily wear my heart on my sleeve, and people often don't understand that, or they take that for granted or assume. People assume that they can because I tend to not want to deal with conflict. Not that I have a problem with conflict or confrontation. I just feel it's wasted energy. Sometimes people make the assumption that that means that I don't have an opinion about something, or maybe I'm not forward thinking. But if you know me, you should know better than that. The people who really know me. But I tend to let people stay in their own emotional and mental space because I'm not one that feels the need to always have to go toe to toe with people. Even if you're doing something I don't agree with, I'll be like, you know something, I'm gonna let you do this over here. And in the back of my mind, I've made a mental note about maybe something that you've said or done to me I don't particularly care for, but I'm gonna let it go because as you learn people, you'll get a better idea of how they perceive you, hence how they interact with you. So that big question, that internal talk is who am I is important to understand. Like I said, this goes back to your core values. This goes back to morals. And when you are congruent in understanding who you are, people don't have to ask because they know. So hence, people who know me know I'm well-informed, I'm hardworking, I tend to be very dependable. People know these things about me because at the core of who I am, those are things that matter to me, and hence those are the things that I project. So as you work through this podcast, I want you to think about this. That internal talk is the focus of the many facets of you. Who am I? You should be able to answer that question. It's like the personal elevator question. And if you don't have an answer, now you know you've got some work to do. Welcome to the show, Vernon Fairley, who catches me in my other facets of you. Yes, when I'm doing sports talk. As you can see, if you want to participate in the show, just like Vernon, all you have to do is post a comment in Facebook or YouTube, and I can share on the screen just like here. Yep, because outside of this, also list your show with Sean. Exactly. The Many Facets of Me. So that's how you can interact with the show. Just post a comment and I'll share it on the screen with everybody what you say. Hopefully by now that you've joined in, you've grabbed your beverage of choice. For me, I'm doing coffee and I'm hydrating with some water. It was a warm day today, so I need to drink more water. But whatever, because it is technically 5 p.m. where I'm at and somewhere else. So feel free to have beer, wine, whatever it is that makes you get comfortable, because this show is about you and me time. It's about focusing on you, something that most people take for granted until they're in crisis or their world is falling apart. The goal of Maya is to help you to avoid being in that situation, thinking things through before they happen. It doesn't mean you're always going to respond exactly the way you should, but you'll be better prepared when you're faced with a challenge. All right, so we talked about self-awareness. We've done our real talk where we talked about understanding you must be able to answer the question for yourself, who am I? And that external talk of, who are you? When who am I is congruent, the who are you is apparent. But there's 3 facets of you I want you to get familiar with, because this will help you to begin to really shape the conversation about who am I if you've never really given it any thought. There are 3 selves that we talk about in psychology, and actually there's a couple more, but this is kind of the standard concept that comes from Carol Rogers and some other humanistic psychologists. And I want you to meet the perceived self, the actual real self, and the ideal self. So what this doesn't mean necessarily is that you're fake. It doesn't mean that you're wearing a mask. And it doesn't mean you're two-faced. I want you to know that. Just because there might be multiple dimensions of who you are doesn't mean that you're not being congruent or you're not being true to yourself. But it's important to know these facets of self, because it helps you to be what is the ideal self. That's what we aspire to be, is the ideal self. So let's get a little bit more up close and personal and get to meet each one of these selves. So let's start with the perceived self. The perceived self represents how you see yourself. So this ultimately is, would you say your self-conflict or concept rather is influenced by how you internalize and process your beliefs, your values, experiences that shape you and impact your life? So this perceived self begins from day one when you're born, and it grows and it matures. Maturation is huge in the perceived self. So let's be honest. Often if people experience trauma or a lot of difficult situations, they're very conflicted, often emotionally and mentally, which means their perceived self may be negative. It may be, I'm no good, I'm worthless, I don't do things right, because their experiences have dictated to them this is who they are, because they have now internalized these experiences and created beliefs based on that, and their values are, I am not of value. I'm not worth the time of day. On the flip side, you may have somebody who had a relatively, let's say, stable childhood, was supported and nurtured. They were allowed to fail, to thrive, all those things. And generally speaking, their perceived self might be, I'm capable, I'm smart, I'm industrious. It depends. And also within your perceived self, it can do a little shifting, because you may have an experience that then challenges your belief systems and your values, and you may grow in a way. So the perceived self to me is something that's always changing and shifting, and it's your growth point. But what's important about your perceived self is that when it's all said and done, it's the most basic part of your self-awareness. It's that sense of being. And this is the thing that makes you distinctive for other. Your perceived self is all about you. So regardless to what you may have in common with others, regardless to experience you might share with others, at the end of the day, who you are is unique to you and not necessarily to others. And that's what's so important about understanding that perceived self, is that it's the most basic part of being self-aware and knowing that your sense of being separates you and makes you distinct from others, which means at any point of time, you have the ability to change, to shift, see that parts of you that maybe you don't particularly care for, and to make those adjustments to be more like the person you want to be in the moment. Because we're going to talk about the ideal self. But within the moment, if you see something within the scope of yourself that you do not care for, Being in the moment is important and making those adjustments accordingly. Okay, so the first element of the many facets of you is that perceived self. The other thing, before we talk about the actual self, that I want you to think about with the perceived self is your self-concept has two main components to consider. Self-image, and that's the view you have of yourself, and self-esteem or self-worth. It's how much value you place on yourself. These two components of the perceived self is so important. And this, like I said, is often rooted in childhood. It doesn't mean that the foundation was laid for you, does not mean it's the foundation you must continue to walk on. Because what do I always say in every episode? You are the architect of your present and your future. You cannot go back and remove the past. What you use your past for is to learn what you did not like, how it affected you, to make the changes to be what you want to be now, and to learn how to be able to achieve the things or be the person you want to be moving down the road. You are the architect of your present and your future. And that part is so important to understand, because many people surrender themselves to the past. And they make the assumption that because I've had trauma, or because I've had so much loss, or because I've always felt like I failed at everything, there's no way I can ever escape that cycle and be something better. That means that person's self-image is broken and they have no self-worth. So the most important components of your perceived self is your image. How do you view yourself? Do you see yourself as competent, loyal, loving, all those positive things? And of course, you may say, I can be a tad bit temperamental, whatever. You know, I get a kick out of, it's Gemini season. I love hearing Geminis talk about themselves. But with that being said, really, it's important to know and ask yourself, what's my self-image? But more importantly, how do you value yourself? And I'm going to tell you how you have respectable value for yourself. When you will not let other people just walk all over you, when you stop conceding to what people always want from you, and you keep in mind what's important for you. And you believe within any exchange or dynamic that you have that, hey, I bring value to this situation. I bring value to this table. That means you're in the right vein of your self-worth. But if you constantly feel like other people are more important than you are, or satisfying their needs is more important than yours, you may need to go back and evaluate your self-worth and esteem, as well as your self-image. Because why do you put everyone first before you put yourself? Two important components to sink in and think about. Okay, let's jump into the actual self. And this is interesting because the perceived self and the actual self can be very conflicted. The important thing you're trying to do is have congruency. And this is the interesting thing. So when you think about the actual self is really more built around social roles a lot. So that self-concept is things like physical attributes are part of the actual self. Things like social, cultural, economic, educational, gender, identifiers are encompassed here. So these are the things that physically people can look at you and say, oh, I know that Maya is female. I know that Maya is African American. I know that Maya, based on, let's say the litmus test, she watches sports. These are all the things that people can see. But it's the intangibles that also get played into the actual real self. So here's where the congruency piece is important. If you say you are a person of your word, would people who know you say you're a person of your word? If you say you're a dependable person, people who know you, would they say you're a dependable person? That congruency piece is huge. So if you're saying all these things and yet people won't necessarily describe you that way, doesn't mean it's always right. But I'm going to tell you something. It's a way to kind of say, I always say, outside evaluation of other people can tell you a lot about yourself. And most people hate to do that. Several episodes back, we talked about Johari's window. I would tell you to go to MA.com, click on the podcast resource section, and just go ahead and scroll down. Scroll down and check out Johari's window. It's something interesting because it really tells you about domains of yourself. But more importantly, it gives you an exercise. If you really want to get external evaluation of how people perceive you, you can actually send this kind of test to people, and it should be people you feel like really know you, and they kind of choose words to describe you. That's it. That's all it is. And then you get the responses back. And what you can say is you also take the test. You get to pick 10 identifiers. And it's interesting to see. Usually, at least I'd say with most people who are truly congruent, more than 50% of what people say matches up. And then some other more positive words may pop up that people didn't realize. Excellent exercise. I encourage people to do Johari's window. Like I said, just go to myakai.com, go to the podcast resource section and scroll down. It's one of the earlier episodes and it explains what Johari's window is, as well as it gives you a link to go and actually participate in the exercise. It's a good way to kind of see how congruent you are with how you think your perceived self is versus that actual self. Now, here's the thing about the actual self. Like I said, it's social roles. It's a large part of self-concept, though. It's how people physically could describe you, and you're in that self domain, and then those aspects of like social, cultural, economic, educational, and gender identifiers are encompassed here. A lot of physical eye test things. Beware and be aware. Two different words with two different meanings. The actual real self is a self-concept that's a kaleidoscope of interaction. And this is what's important to know. It's a kaleidoscope of interactions and assumptions. It's not who you necessarily are, but rather who people have come to believe you to be. And that's why when you are grounded in your perceived self, but you get feedback that looks different, ask yourself why the feedback seems different. Now, we are fluid as humans. There are times where we have challenges, we have loss, we have trauma, and it does affect our perceived self. We may waver in our convictions. Our core values or morals might get shaky. So there doesn't mean there can't even be a shift in your perceived self, especially if you're under a lot of duress or you feel overwhelmed. It's very easy for that to happen. But at the core of who you are, I'm going to tell you this. You still should be congruent because people who really know you would be, it's not like Maya to be kind of angry or to be mean or what's going on with her. I always say when you see a shift or a change in someone's personality, there probably means there's something going on. And if you're truly a friend and you really care about that person, you'll ask them, hey, are you okay? Because I kind of noticed this, and that's not the you that I know. So beware and be aware that the actual / real self is a self-concept that is a kaleidoscope of interaction and assumptions. It's not who you necessarily are, but rather who people have come to believe you to be. Now, this is why I tell people, don't do things like fake it till you make it. Always be you. Be in the moment, be true to who you are. And if you have some goals to change and do different things, that's okay. I had a client once who said to me, and I just looked at him and I said, well, this is not congruent. He did not like his life. He was not happy with where he was. He said, I hate mediocrity. I don't want to be normal. I want to have money. I want to live my life like this. Well, the problem was he wasn't doing anything that was going to move him towards that goal. And his thought was, well, if I can't have this, what I feel is high value life, if I can't be wealthy, then life has no purpose and I'd rather not be here. And it was funny, not congruent in any way, shape, or form. And I said it. I said, you're not congruent in what your expectations of yourself are and the effort you're putting into this goal you've created. I said, so how exactly do you expect to get to that goal based on the job that you have and you have no plan to get out of that job because you just told me you're okay with it? That's not a job that creates this wealth stream that's going to make you be this exceptionally wealthy person. And then he just looked at me. I said, you're not being congruent. I said, but you're finding excuses to not step to the plate and to pursue your goal. Why is that? What are you afraid of? It was interesting. It was really, really interesting. So be mindful of your perceived self and your actual self because you do want to see congruency with these two things. And the final dimension of the many facets of you is the ideal self. And this is something we have to be careful with. The ideal self represents how we would like to be. It represents self-actualization. So mind you, if you are the person that's always trying to enrich yourself and grow, yes, that means you're going to want better things for yourself. Yes, you may have some goals that at this moment you can't achieve, but it's a long-term goal that you're working towards. And there may be some shifts in who you are, but remember, at the core of who you are, you really remain the same. There might just be some things that maybe you become more proficient at something. Maybe you decide that you want to be a entrepreneur versus, I don't want to be someone's employee. Different things like that. So the ideal self ultimately is improvements you would like to have from where you currently are, which is about growth and development. So the ideal self isn't this lofty idea of perfection. And that's often where people get confused with that. Something that's important about the ideal self, it's influencing factors. And you need to ask yourself when you're talking about the ideal self is one, how do others, personal, especially personal, intimate relationships, how do they react to me? You know, do I feel like they accept me in who I am right now, my perceived self? The next thing you'd ask yourself is, how do you think you compare to others? A lot of times when people are creating this idea of their ideal self, they're actually being critical of themselves based on what other people are doing, which may not even be part of their reality. But yet we like to use other people's to judge ourselves. Now, mind you, if you have a role model, someone who's doing something positive, outgoing, they're a difference maker, they're a game changer. There's nothing wrong with looking up to people who are influencing and changing the world and impacting the world around them. That's healthy. But you always have to remember at the end of the day, you can only be the best version of you, which may not be that person that you admire. The important is it's good to admire someone, but you should never idolize them because that's not healthy. And the other thing you should ask yourself in that ideal self, like what's shaping your concept of this, is how are you defined by your social roles? And this is a huge part of it because I didn't dive deep into social roles when I talked about the real or actual you, and I probably should have, because social roles are those things that define you as, are you a wife? Are you a mother? Are you a sister, a brother? Are you are you a manager? Are you a peer to someone? All these different roles and impact how you interact with people and the experiences that you have. So you might excel at work and you're focused on work because work and career might be one of your core values and you excel and you're exceptional. And then you may go home and feel absolutely inferior. I see this with people all the time. So when you're trying to figure out that shift and getting you to that best version of yourself, which is that ideal self, it's about self-actualization, not perfection, but actualizing those things that really will make you happy and you feel like you're excelling. So the questions I asked you to ask yourself, let's go back. How do others in personal and intimate relationships react to you? Because that's going to influence that ideal self. How do you think you compare to others? And is it a real and is it an honest comparison? Are you comparing yourself to something like that absolutely doesn't make sense because you aspire to be them, you idolize them, opposed to you aspire you're inspired by what they do? And how are you defined by your social roles? Do you only see yourself as, I know some people that their role as a parent is 70% how they see themselves. They have no idea how to really explain themselves or define themselves outside of being a parent or being an employee. And outside of that, they struggle with the other roles of self. When they're alone in their own space, they really can't define themselves because they only live for the role of being a parent and being a stellar employee. And other aspects of their lives, especially, let's say, when a person loses their job or their parent or their children move on, they mature, they go to college, they move out the house, and you have the empty nester syndrome. A lot of people struggle to figure out who they are because they've sunk so much of their energy into those roles. Another thing that's key to understand, and this is a big one, how do you identify with others politically, religiously, and professionally? That's a big part of self as well. Right now, I'm going to tell you something. The political, social, and religious stuff is heated. And people clearly are standing their grounds. That tells you a lot about themselves, who they are. And I think that people who have strong convictions, whether right or wrong, it's because they feel a connection to what it is that they believe in. And I'll tell you something, those are roles. When I talked about the dimensions of self being social, cultural, economic, those play huge. Some people see their value based on how much money they have. Some people base their value, their self-worth based on how many, designer handbags or shoes they have, what kind of car they drive. That economic and social presence is how they define themselves and how they see value. But how many wealthy people do we see often who are absolutely misery? Because we know money can't buy happiness. We try to convince ourselves of that, but we see on a regular basis that that's not the case. So those are the many facets of you. There's a perceived self, how you see yourself. There's the actual or real self, how others perceive you. And then there is the ideal self, which fits into what we talk about is working to that best version of you, where you want to be, the changes you want to make to yourself to be the kind of person that you want to be. You see some things in yourself, you're like, there's a couple things about me I want to make some changes with. I want to do this, I want to do that. And that's the key thing. That's super important. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to dive a bit more into talking about the identity piece to a lot of these pieces, making sure you understand when you're working on your self-concept, those 3 facets of you, making sure that we're working towards congruency, because that's what we're putting in our toolbox today is congruency. We'll talk a bit about that after the break. Sit tight. You're tuned into M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 42, the Many Facets of You. I'll be right back.
I can't breathe. I have migraines, numbness, weight loss. I live with it every day. The illness that I'm suffering from is an anxiety disorder, and it deserves to be treated like any other illness. But it's not.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans, and soon they will be available to everyone.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
I want to go back to work and I want to be able to move around.
To visit with Michelle's mom, to hug her and see her on her birthday.
You know what I'm really looking forward to is going to opening day in Texas Ranger Stadium with a full stadium.
We've lost enough people and we've suffered enough damage.
In order to get rid of this pandemic, it's important for our fellow citizens to get vaccinated.
I'm getting vaccinated because we want this pandemic to end as soon as possible.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
So roll up your sleeve and do your part.
This is our shot.
Now it's up to you.
Please stop and listen, because this important message may directly apply to you or someone dear to you. Several thousand African American former full-time CPS teachers were unfairly terminated starting in the mid-90s and continuing to the 2000s. If you are one of those many former CPS teachers who was unjustly terminated, or if you are the immediate relative of a now deceased unjustly terminated former CPS teacher, you may qualify to participate in a lawsuit at no upfront cost to you. Please call 773-580-7183 immediately for more information. That's 773-580-7183. Do not delay. Act today, because time is of the essence. That's 773-580-7183. 773-580-7183.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.
Hi, welcome back to M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 42. 2 weeks late. I had a little hiatus in there, but glad to be back to share what I think is a very important conversation, especially right now when people have really been challenged during the pandemic. A lot of people are struggling with readjusting. You know, it's like people want to get back to life as they knew it. And there's that interesting conversation is, well, will it be as we know it? Will it changes? I think there'll be some slight changes to things as we've known it. But overall, a lot of people, because of the adversity they faced for almost a year, they're really struggling. You know, a lot of people were challenged financially. A lot of people were challenged emotionally, mentally. People lost loved ones. It was a very tumultuous year, not just because of the pandemic, but all of the circumstances and situations that the pandemic created for individual people. And that's why I feel like what I do here is so important. When people start to do the work on themselves, it prepares you for those challenges. It doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, the pandemic was called stepping out of your comfort zone. And here's what it looks like. But the difference with the pandemic was it didn't ask you if you wanted to step out your comfort zone. It pushed you out of your comfort zone. And the question is, what did you do with it? Here was my approach to it. I ended 2020 totally looking to make a shift. I wanted to take my state licensures test. I wanted to buy a property. All those things got shut down because of the pandemic. And it took until coming into 2021 where I was able to do those things. But what I did was I used that time to make sure that those two goals I wanted to happen, that I was prepared. I studied, I was ready to go. Passed the test on the first time. And I'm gonna tell you something about perception of self, which is so important. Because we all sometimes fall short of always believing in ourselves. We waver. It's fair. Everybody has it. And the test I was taking for my license as a mental health counselor to do private practice and other things is a test that many people fail the first time. And in the back of my mind, I had ingrained that, like, people fail this the first time. I was almost setting myself up for failure because that was the case with most people. Funny enough, obviously, I didn't fail the test. Now, I'm not going to tell you this. I don't feel that I performed at the level I would have liked to. I did better than average, though. But I didn't perform at the level that I'm used to from a standpoint of things of that nature. But what I walked away from when I passed, and I remember looking at the score right there on the computer and taking a huge deep breath, is why did I question my ability? Because I was comparing myself to others, making the assumption that I would fail like they had failed. Well, that's funny because for me, I have always taken great pride academically as being a stellar student and relatively intelligent, truth be told. I was like, so why in this moment did I fall back into, well, most people fail, so I'll probably fail too. I lost sight of myself and the things of how I identify, which is being intelligent, competent, hardworking, focused, determined. That's me. And that's exactly how I approached that test and passed it. So sometimes you got to check yourself before you wreck yourself because you're listening to other people and what their internal dialogue is that turns into external dialogue. I lost sight of who my perceived self was because I got nervous. So this is kind of a share story, just worth sharing, I thought. All right, so we talked about, before we went to the break, about many facets of you, including the perceived self, the ideal self, and the actual real self and the ideal self. Let's have our next real talk time, because this is something for me that whenever I throw these out, it means this is food for thought. I really want you to chew on this. This is part of the question that's big in the podcast. So this is our real talk time too. Let's revisit the questions I asked in the first part of the show. Who are you? That's the external question. So when I say, who are you? Who do you think you are? Who are you? You can answer that question. Let me tell you who I am. Okay. And you might do it with conviction because someone's questioning, who are you? Who are you to think that you can do this or do that? And sometimes you ask that and you're like, I'm not sure who they think they are, but okay. And you don't know. That's the thing. When you know people, you don't ask that question because you know exactly who they are. But the question that I really want you to chew on and process is, who am I? It's the internal talk. Remember, episode 41 was about self-talk and how important it was to get that internal dialogue right. Because when you know who am I, the who are you has no relevance. But the key thing is they should be congruent if you're being true to self. If you're projecting the you that you want people to know and see, and you're being honest and true, the who are you and the who am I should be congruent. They should almost be a mirror image. Now, it doesn't mean that you show every aspect of yourself to everyone. That's another thing too, because remember, I say all the time to people, there's professional domains and there's personal domains. And I say all the time, if a person is like, I'm the same 100% of the time, I'm like, and that might be why you get in trouble sometimes. You might need to dial back that personal you and keep it over here and understand in professional realms, certain behaviors that you think is okay in your personal realms may not be okay in professional realms. And now you've gotten yourself in a whole heaping of trouble because you don't know how to put a filter on it. And people get upset. And it's interesting. I'm like, you can't get upset about it because when you're in a professional realm, you're talking about a larger social sphere of people who have their own beliefs, morals, values, but professionally, you work for somebody and there's a set mission statement and there's a culture that exists. And if you're pushing the grain against that culture, or here's one better, if the culture doesn't work for you, make your exit plan to get out and find a professional culture that mirrors who you are. And many people have felt this way, like, I like my job, but this company, I can't do it. I just can't do it. But right now I got to stay here. And I get it. But if you can't tolerate the culture or make the adjustments, then you need to figure out what you can do to make it work. And there's ways to do that. I just want to say that there's ways to do it. So when we talked about those questions, who are you, the external versus the who am I? There's a couple ways we're going to look at this to help you be able to answer the question, who am I? Because I really want you to flesh this out. Because sometimes people are like, well, I think I have an idea, but I can't quite put it into words. I feel that I'm loyal and I'm honest and I'm hardworking. Okay. But dig a little deeper. Let's get into identity. So identity is more of the roles you step into. So it's like I said earlier, are you a mother, a sister, a brother, a daughter, a father, a son, a boss, an employee, a peer, a friend? These are all roles that we have that we interchange on a daily basis. Frequently, sometimes we're doing these things at the same time. So think about it. For people who were working at home during the pandemic and their children weren't in school, guess what? They were wearing many hats during the day. They were a parent, they were an employee. Oh, but wait, they also became an educator too. So they had to modify and make adjustments accordingly to what was needed. So some people had to learn how to work from home. A lot of individuals, especially children, struggled with e-learning because it's not something they were accustomed to. So within that role as a learner, they struggled because it wasn't part of what they were used to. Most kids, especially early on, are brick and mortar. They're used to that hear, see, touch type of learning. Older kids did a bit better, but some still struggled because that social piece, they missed that social interaction with their peers. So you have many roles that interchange frequently. But the key question I would ask you about roles is that, how do you place value on them? It's interesting. Do you feel more value as a mother, more value as a spouse, more value as a friend? Where are your high value roles? And if they're high value, how so? And where do you place yourself within those roles? Now, I understand with parents, it's always going to be my kids come before me, and I get that. Even though at some point when your children become adults, I need people to learn to shift that, because I've seen people who allow their adult children to be very disrespectful. Mind you, it's a carryover from when they were children, but they allow it to continue, and it's really interesting to me. So, but that's people who struggle with self-worth and self-esteem. I'm going to tell you that. So, what are the key roles that you would say define you right now? If you had to pick max of 3, is it I'm an employee, I'm a daughter, and I'm a friend? Not necessarily of order of importance, but those would be the 3 roles that to me really encompass a good portion of who I am. And then after that, then you can start to evaluate your roles in those positions and the interactions and experiences. Are they positive? Do you have a good connection with your parents? Do you feel you parent your children well? Do you feel like you are a good employee? Do you feel appreciated by your employer? These are all things that kind of build into understanding those roles and how they impact your perceived self, as well as that idea self. Another key one, and this is one that can be interesting for people when you talk about asking the question, who am I? So you figure out here are key roles that really define me. Then you ask yourself, from a social identity side, how people perceive you in this role is key. So would someone say, oh, Maya is a very hardworking employee. Maya is very knowledgeable. That's one thing I take pride in. I've never had a job that people didn't think I was knowledgeable. I have people come and ask me questions that have nothing to do with my job. Seriously. Do you happen to know anything about this? And I make a joke and say, well, I did sleep in La Quinta Inn last night, if you know that commercial. I was like, I don't. And here's a funny thing. I tend to have an answer because I take pride in not just knowing my job, but what other people do around me. I'm always trying to learn, immerse, and grow and be a very well-rounded employee. And that's something people have always come to learn. I've had people come to me and say, I honestly don't know this, but do you? Yeah. So that's one thing that's a consistent variable in my personality, that wherever I've worked someplace, I've always been that go-to person. It's consistent and I know it. So I can say I think I lead with the fact that I'm dependable, I'm knowledgeable. Those are things I think are congruent with me and my professional domain and that role of how people see me. But it's important. Remember I said you need congruency in your perceived self and that actual real self. So when you're saying, who am I? It's like, am I congruent? So if I say I'm dependable, am I dependable? If I say I'm honest, am I honest? And you will know that by how people interact with you. So for some reason, if people fail to come with you with something, you're like, why didn't you come and ask me that? And I'm like, well, I didn't want to bother you. I mean, I'm not saying that can't be the case, but if it was something really of importance, you may question why. And here's the thing, if it happens frequently, ask yourself why. So that social identity piece is huge. Then you get into the who am I, that self-identity piece. It's your self-concept, which is a collection, like I said, of beliefs, morals, values, experiences that culminate into who I am. So if you say beliefs, I believe that, generally speaking, all people are created equal. It doesn't matter if we have the same backgrounds. It doesn't matter if we're the same gender, religion, political. None of that matters to me. I look at people as equals. And I say that, and I look at people as equals who probably would think they're better than me. I'll be like, excuse me, what exactly makes you better than me? Oh, wait, because you often, I'll tell you this, I've seen this exchange in working in a healthcare system. A lot of times, a lot of physicians will be really full of themselves. They feel like, I'm a doctor, so I'm better than you. And I've seen that behavior. I have seen them disrespect actually someone who would be their peer because they're not their boss. And I was looking like, wow, they're better than me because I couldn't do it. And I've had some times where I've pulled people to the side and said, let me talk to you really quick. I said, this, and this, but don't make the mistake in thinking you can disrespect and talk to me like that, because I will not accept that. I said, I understand you're a doctor, but you have your role, I have mine. And you know what? You might want to rethink how you treat people. And I'm gonna tell you something. I am big about commanding respect, and I've done it a couple times. What else is my perceived? Oh, M.A.Y.A is very, don't mess with M.A.Y.A. I will stand ground for myself. I will not let people disrespect me. I will find my voice, which I did a long time ago professionally, because in healthcare, it can be like that. But there's that pecking order, and we see it in society. When people are wealthy, they think they're better than people who have less. It's a construct that's interesting. So I think it's important that knowing what you believe, I believe that people are created equal regardless to who they are. I'll be honest, even when someone's, when they're in poverty, I don't look down at people because they don't have something, because the thing that I've learned in the scope of my job of 12 years is everybody has a story of how they've gotten to be in poverty. Now, I'm not going to tell you there's some things that I don't particularly care for that people do that are in positions of poverty, but I understand everyone has a story, and I wouldn't treat them any less human than anybody else. I don't. And I see a lot of homeless people in my job all the time. I don't treat them any different than I would anybody else, because everybody has a story that's interesting. That's my morals. Be good to people, because you might be the person that changes that person's life. So that's important to know your self-identity, those beliefs, morals, core values. Get back in that episode and check it out. When it's all said and done, when we talk about these things, congruency and identity is what this is all about. When you are congruent, that means there's less conflict. How much does your identities mirror each other is really, really important. Congruency is a thing you want to put in this toolbox. So once you start answering, who am I? Who are you? Do they look the same? I'm not saying there won't be slight differences, but your who am I is what you should be projecting and what people should be receiving. Oh, this is who you are, without a doubt, unequivocally. Podcast threads. I talked about episode 41 with self-talk. If you find yourself searching for yourself more often than not, then who I am is really who am I? Seriously. I'm going to say it again. Podcast thread. That's self-talk. We're talking about this internal question you're asking yourself when you're trying to understand the many facets of you. If you find yourself searching for yourself more often than not, like, I just don't know who I am, I just feel disjointed, I don't feel like me, then who I am is really who am I? And that's important to understand. Two different statements with deep meaning. Who am I can be, this is who I am. Who I am, clearly you know who you are. So understand those two things. They're important. And that would be a podcast thread that comes from the self-talk, obviously, in episode 41. Let's have a toolbox time, the official toolbox time of the show. How can you begin to work on being more congruent in your self-concept? This is now where we're going to wind it down and say, here's some things you can start to work on if you feel like your perceived self and your actual real self are really not lining up, and you're still kind of working on who you really want to be. That's okay, because who you're working towards, that ideal self, that best version of you that we talk about here at M.A.Y.A, can be a work in progress. But we look for those daily milestones, that you're achieving things that make you better. Here's some things I want you to start to learn to really begin to have that internal conversation of, who am I? Learn, one, to be quiet. And this is interesting. Being quiet means just know you cannot and will not be able to know yourself until you take the time to be still. Be present in the moment. Begin to listen to yourself, hear your self-talk. Go back to episode 41 if you haven't, just revisit it. The be still and listen to you and hear the dialogue. I am capable. I am amazing. I'm exceptional. I nailed that. Or is the internal dialogue different? Is it, I always mess things up. I could have done that better. You second guess yourself a lot. What is the self-talk? What's that internal dialogue you're having? Be quiet and hear it, because that right there will begin to tell you what your image, your self-worth and your self-esteem and your self-image, you will know what it looks like based on that internal talk that you're having. The second thing I want you to do is acknowledge who you truly are in your perceived self right now. Knowing who you are right now, what you are capable of, how you are living up to your current potential and not your future. So we all have skill sets that are given to us in the moment, and we can grow and go beyond that. But right now, are you living up to the full potential of who you can be? Acknowledge, hey, I'm good at this. I want to be better at this. I want to aspire to this. But right now, this is me. And I'm going to do that best version of me because this is where I'm at in the moment. People get so focused on the future, they forsake or totally miss the present. And that's where so much of the work and the amazing things happen, and they miss it because they're looking ahead. You need to be present with yourself and say, this is who I am right now. I know I want to do better, but right now, let me give myself some credit for what I'm doing and the work I'm putting in. That's key. The third thing I want you to think about is learn your strengths and weaknesses. More importantly, knowing your limitations is a powerful tool to work on your desired growth. If you're good at something right now, but you know you're not here, don't beat yourself up about it, because that can be a short or long-term goal that you work towards. Know your strength, know what you're good at, know where your shortcomings are, and shore up your shortcomings, get better at them, grow your strengths. But more importantly, know exactly what your limitations are. Damage is often done to people's self-value and self-esteem when they don't know their limitations, which also could be boundaries. Knowing when to stop, when to know when to say enough is enough. This is too much for me. And not feeling ashamed that you acknowledge that it's too much for you at the moment. 4, what drives you? That's that passion, that conversation about passion. What are you passionate about? Passion provides direction. It becomes that that light that illuminates what matters to you, where your interests are. If you find that you have an interest in nothing, and a lot of people are like that, like, I don't have an interest in anything, or they lost their interest. They just don't feel motivated. Something in your life has changed or shift, and you got to figure out what it is so you can find that passion, because without passion, life often seems meaningless and empty. Other ways to help you gauge and manage that self-concept is create a network of supportive and positive people. Trusted feedback is amazing. Feedback can help you with working on your strengths and your weaknesses, as well as getting an idea of how congruent you are with your self-concept of your perceived self and your actual real self. If you have a good enough friend, you should be able to go to them, or they should be able to tell you, I'm noticing this seems kind of disjointed with you. And you can say, I always felt like I was this kind of person, but I question that now. What's your thoughts on this? And this is a question you ask for someone who honestly is supportive and positive, and they know you, because outside feedback can help you grow. Now, mind you, people struggle with the idea of criticism, like right out the gates, I'm gonna be honest. So hence the idea of asking people for feedback, because we often only want to hear the good things. But growth and getting out your comfort zone is hearing and understanding the things that make you uncomfortable. Something else I want you to do is you're working on being more congruent in your self-concept is assess your relationships. Who are you in your social roles? Is it congruent with who you feel you are or want to be? Why or why not? If you're really focused on being an exceptional parent, that's great. But please don't lose your sense of self. Because at some point, your children are going to go on and have their own life, and you'll be wavering and like, wow, now that I'm not parenting, who am I? Some people are into their careers and they pour themselves into it, and the rest of their relationships suffer. Strike a balance. Learn how to be more than that. It's so complicated, but these are 6 things that I feel you can do that can legitimately make a difference. So let's wind down the final thoughts of the show. One thing I said earlier, and I really want you to think about this. Be aware and be where. There are many different opinions about ultimately the pursuit of happiness and self-fulfillment. Lately, I'd say, there's a lot of self-proclaimed relationship gurus and things of that nature giving people advice. And the thing that I find distressing about most of those people, I'm not even going to get my soapbox and say, well, they're not even licensed professionals or haven't had the training and all these different things, because that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have those things to be good at what you're doing. But I always find that people who find their way to them are people who struggle in this domain right here, their self-concept, understanding who they are. So my thing is, if you're still searching for you and you're taking advice from somebody, you're allowing them to shape you. And that can be a dangerous thing, because what I said earlier with Aristotle is, self-awareness is the beginning of growth and knowledge, and you can find the answers. And it doesn't mean you can't listen to what people are sharing, but their opinions and advice should not begin to shape you. I'm going to tell you something. When you're a lost soul looking for someone to save you, chances are it may not work to your advantage. And I'm seeing a lot of it, and I find that a little concerning. I want people to start to do the self-work. And when you are being that best version of you, you will attract to you the things that you are worthy of and the things that you really want, opposed to trying to create this image of yourself that isn't real. Understand this is work. It's mental and emotional exercise that you have to do consistently. So don't panic or give up. Some people may find it easier than others to consciously use positive self-talk to kind of navigate these things. But asking yourself those questions, who am I, is really, really important. Have faith in yourself, do the work. The heavy lifting, it's never going to be easy getting to the best version of you, that ideal self. But I'll tell you this, it's worth the work, and the fulfillment you will get from it will come from you, because you are the architect of your present and your future. There is no one doing the past, but the materials you decide to build your present that becomes your future is all incumbent on you. So are you building this with positivity, with belief, love, or negativity and doubt? Self-doubt and self-sabotage is what keeps us from being that best version of us. And that's what Maya is all about, is pulling back that veil. Let's pull it back. Let's look at it. Let's pick it up and look at it and figure out what to do with it. In the meantime, we're putting a toolbox over here, and we're putting objectivity and emotional intelligence. Oh, and this week now we're putting congruency in there, being congruent in who you are in your perceived self, as well as who you actually are to others. They should mirror each other. And if they're not, you have to ask yourself, why am I being different than who I believe that I am? Why am I modifying myself this way? Who am I? And people shouldn't be asking you, who are you? All right, everybody, that's it for episode 42, The Many Facets of You. Thank you for listening. Of course, remember, you can find episodes of Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition, at MA.com. Remember, there will be some additional things I will put in the podcast resource section. So just go to MA.com, click on podcast resources, and there'll be some additional things there that you can read that can kind of expand this conversation with you. Hopefully by now you have subscribed to my YouTube channel. I would ask you kindly subscribe, like, and share so I can grow my audience. Maybe you don't need this, but you might know somebody else that could gain some insight from this. So subscribe to my YouTube channel, to search M.A.Y.A as well. But here's the thing. If you have your own podcast platform of choice, I won't hold it against you because you're still being supportive. You can always find me on Apple Podcasts. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Audibles. I'm pretty much everywhere. All you have to do is search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and you can find all 42 episodes of my podcast on any of those platforms. Again, everybody, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening. And like I say every single week, your present becomes your past and your future is no more. So you must live every single day to the fullest. Until next week, everybody, work on who am I? Ciao.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A Akai.com.